Good afternoon, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to start by reading our our virtual agreement here. I'm calling things to order this morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Due to the governor's order, all members of the Public Assembly Facilities Commission are participating virtually. For virtual meetings, commission members will be muted until asked to be heard. At that time, they will be recognized and will be unmuted. When there is a vote, it will be necessary to take a roll call vote. A commission member will be recognized and will raise their hand to state their vote. Today's meeting is a public meeting per the notice posted on February 12th, 2021. Citizens can listen to the meeting if they contacted the city manager's office to make the necessary arrangements. The meeting will also be live streamed on the city's YouTube channel and can be accessed at the city's website. A recording of today's meeting will be available on Friday, February 19th on the city's website. And we'll go ahead and get started with a roll call, please.
Haley Jingles.
Present.
Otis Northington. Not on. Billy Rich.
Here.
Jim Rose.
Here.
Manya Stewart. Is she here? Let's see. Oh, sorry. Hold on. I lost my page. Kathleen Garber. Vicki Miller.
Present.
Lisa Strout. And Ray Bowden. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. We're going to move on to the approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. Thank you for sending those out to all of us. Could I get a motion to approve those minutes, please, Commission?
So moved. Second.
A motion has been made and seconded to approve the minutes of the January meeting. Is there any question? All in favor? We'll do this by a roll call, please.
Jim?
Aye.
Haley?
Aye.
Lisa?
Aye.
Billy?
Aye.
Vicki?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. We'll move on to the resolution recommending the City Council approval of the new lease agreement with the Winston-Salem Speedway Inc.
Okay, good afternoon, Chair Jingles, members of the Public Assembly Facility Commission. Last month, we presented a proposed agreement for a new lease with Winston-Salem Speedway Inc. It would be a 30-year agreement. Basically, it's an update to the current agreement with the longer term. It would also adjust the rent payment schedule to extend the rent amount that would have been paid in 2020 to 2021, and then continue the payment schedule going forward from that point, where it would increase every 3 years. It would also provide for both the city and for Winston-Salem Speedway Inc. to jointly determine the staffing for security. As I mentioned last month, we've had some challenges over the years getting sufficient staffing from Winston-Salem PD and the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office, and just what that provision would do would enable both sides to utilize independent security providers if needed. The first option would be to use Winston-Salem Police Department and Forsyth County Sheriff's Office law enforcement officials, but then supplement that as needed. And as I mentioned, it's an update, so it recognizes the fact that since the current agreement went into effect back in 2011, that we've built a new storage facility that needs to be acknowledged in the agreement. Times have changed in terms of social media, and it just incorporates and acknowledges those types of opportunities for broadcast rights. And some other technical adjustments. So during the discussion last month, there were some concerns expressed by commission members about the proposed term of the agreement, excuse me, and about the rent amount and whether the city was potentially covering its expenses through the agreement. And so Staff has prepared some additional information that we incorporated into the item for the commission members to consider. And I just wanted to kind of touch on some of those items very quickly. So Rachel, if you could scroll to the second page where those additional information is provided. First thing I wanted to share, actually, Rachel, I'm sorry, it's the third page. So the city, the income that the city relies on to cover its expenses for operating the stadium during racing season basically comes from two sources: the rent that Winston-Salem Speedway Inc. pays on a weekly basis during the season, and then our share of concession revenues, 30%. The first point there, just want to raise is that that's really not the typical model for a small short track race. Of course, we're a publicly owned stadium, but in other small tracks that are privately owned, concession income actually is something that they rely on to operate their weekly racing series. And so we do have the benefit of getting 30% of the net concession sales, and we rely on that to cover our expenses during the racing season. Also, just the point there, number two, so some years ago, the city was looking for additional opportunities to generate revenue during racing season. And one, discussion that took place was the selling of beer. And at the time, the sponsorship that we had, or we were going to receive, and some of that money going to Winston-Salem Speedway Inc., the agreement was made that the city would retain the commission from the beer sales, and but then we would also use those revenues to fund, staffing the beer garden, and covering other non-concession staffing expenses. Concession staffing expenses are covered out of concession revenues by our concessionaire, but this would be providing the security that we have in the beer garden during racing events and other non-concession staffing. And then third, I wanted to point out this chart here, and just kind of looking the proposed rent schedule that's laid out in the new agreement versus what the rent schedule could look like if we did something that you often see in other agreements, which is to just adjust the rent amount by the consumer price index. And right now, inflation is very low. It's only about 1.4% according to the most recent report from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. And so you can see there with the green bar that's what the proposed rent would be under the agreement. So every 3 years, it would step up $250 per event, per race night. If we just increased it by the CPI every year, you can see that adjusted rent would not approach what we would be charging for the rent under the agreement. Also, under our current user manual, we charge a promoter to hold an event down at Bowman Gray $3,500 in rent for the event. That does not include any reimbursable expenses that we would potentially pass along, but it is $3,500 per event. So that is lower than what we are proposing to charge Winston-Salem Speedway Inc. In terms of reimbursable expenses, if you'll scroll a bit further down, Rachel, to number 4, Winston-Salem Speedway Inc. handles a lot of the staffing that sometimes we would handle, the city would handle, and then pass back along to the promoter, principally ticket sellers and ticket takers, so our ticketing staff. That is something that they bear that cost. And so that's not something that we incur the expense and then pass it along. So I think there's a sharing of expenses there that has been in place for some time. We do provide the traffic control and the parking enforcement during racing season. As I had mentioned, there's a provision in the agreement to, allow both sides to determine the appropriate level of security staffing. But those expenses that we incur for those needs are covered by the rent payment and the concession revenue. And the next chart that you see below basically demonstrates that if you look at right there, Rachel, you were in a good spot. Go back you're right, that table, that chart. So if you look at that chart, that is kind of a pro forma for the city's profit loss during racing season. And we just wanted to go back a couple of years to show you some actual experience, plus what we would project, hopefully in a normal year, going forward. And so you can see that the city does realize a profit during racing season. So we are covering more than just our direct expenses for supporting race nights. You can see there, just as a note, that 2021, the current fiscal year that we're in, that we are showing a small amount of net income. It is a lower amount. Basically, just the assumption there is that perhaps we may be able to race the June dates, but that's just simply a guesstimate at this point. We're preparing for racing to start on April 17th, but just for the purposes of showing the commission a projection, we're trying to be conservative and say, well, if we do race, maybe we're able to race towards the end of the fiscal year in June. And even with just 1 month, we would realize a little bit of net income from racing season. Moving on down the talking points again, we're proposing a 30-year lease. I think that we have the real fortune of having two very stable tenants that utilize Bowman Gray Stadium, Winston-Salem State, and Winston-Salem Speedway Inc. And we want to just continue to have those relationships with both entities, and having the 30-year lease with Winston-Salem Speedway Inc. makes that lease term comparable to what we have with the university. Just to note again that there's language in the proposed agreement that would allow the city and Salem Speedway Inc. to review the agreement partially through the term, and discuss if there's a need to make updates to the agreement. That's exactly what we're doing now. I mean, the current agreement began on 2011. We're 10 years into a 20-year agreement. And there was a determination that we needed to update the agreement, and part of that is to make the term comparable to what we have with Winston-Salem State. Just a couple of the other points that the question came up about naming rights. I think that one is a bit of a challenge because of the conditions that came along with the donation that came from the Bowman Gray family. When we built the stadium, we have to maintain the name Bowman Gray as part of the name. I know that when you see a lot of other stadiums that sometimes they name parts of the stadium, like the field, and that's just something that's a discussion that city staff would have to have, with whether it's the university or whether Winston-Salem Speedway Inc., because those naming opportunities may be something where it's more of a revenue sharing opportunity as opposed to an opportunity just for the city to generate income. So we've not really been approached about naming rights for, let's say, the football field, but that's just not something that the city would unilaterally, I think, pursue at this point. And then the remaining notes here, we were trying to just kind of give a sense of the value of this series to the community, and to Winston-Salem, noting the expense that that the teams incur to be able to race there, and that the goal is to truly provide an affordable form of family entertainment. There's so many opportunities that compete for a family's dollar and attention, whether it's just simply technology and social media or the movies, that type of thing. And so, one of the goals is to make sure that racing remains an affordable an affordable form of family entertainment. And something else that was pointed out to staff is that Winston-Salem Speedway Inc. has had NASCAR officials come and visit the track, and they see the sponsorships that the drivers and the teams have, and they've commented that that's just not something that they see at other small tracks, that usually they're just solid colors, and they don't have the sponsorship. And I think a lot of that's born out of the type of attendance that Bowman Gray Racing generates, and then there is an opportunity for, sponsors to get their names, whether it's on the car or in the stadium, to promote, their business. And so, and then finally, just wanted to note to Winston-Salem Speedway Inc.'s involvement with the community through Winston-Salem State's Motorsports Management Program and Forsyth Tech's Race Car Technology Program. Just point out that I think they have been a community partner in that regard. So, but I think the two main concerns that were raised last month, just wanted to make sure that staff provided you all some additional information about that, mainly in terms of the fact that the city is covering its expenses during racing season through the rent and through our share of concession sales. That we can revisit the agreement, during the term and make updates. We're just not going to be locked into a 30-year term that we cannot revisit and change if the situation requires it. So I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Commissioners, if there are no further questions for Ben, could we get a motion to approve the resolution recommending the City Council approval of the agreement with Winston-Salem Speedway Inc.?
I move for approval.
Is there a second? Don't everybody rush at once.
Second.
Thank you. A motion has been made and seconded. Is there any question? All in favor, we'll do this by a roll call vote.
Jim,
Aye.
Haley,
Aye.
Lisa,
Aye.
Billy,
Aye.
Vicky,
Aye.
and it looks like Mania's joined as well. Mania?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. Next, we'll move on to the review of the mid-year fiscal 2021 financial statements.
Okay, I'm going to pinch hit for Lisa today. So we're going to start out with the official statement for the Carolina Classic Fair. These are our mid-year financial statements. So this is 6 months that you'll see reflected here. You'll see here that there's a theme. Obviously, our public assembly facilities have had minimal activity during the first 6 months of the year because of the pandemic. And so you'll see that the numbers reflect. So let's start with the Carolina Classic Fair. You can see there on the revenue side, operating revenues, that we've got $42,000 in concessions. That's basically from the drive-through did back in early October. So that was an alternative to our regular fair that we did provide to the community. I think we had a great turnout for that. And so that $42,000 would be the revenue that we realized through that event. Obviously, that's a significant reduction from the $3 million, almost $3.1 million that we had realized at this point last fiscal year. I will share with you kind of as a side note on this that staff, we've become aware that through the U.S. Small Business Administration, they have what's called a shuttered venue operator program where they are providing grant funds to facilities that have fixed seat backs that provide certain type of entertainment so that they could get a grant to help offset some of their losses. While this doesn't necessarily apply to the fair, because we do have the annex, and the annex has fixed seats and that type of thing, we are investigating whether local governments are qualified to apply for the grant, and we're waiting for more guidance to come out of the Small Business Administration to determine if we can at least submit an application and perhaps secure some funds to help with offsetting our lost revenue. So I just wanted to mention that because obviously this is a big financial hit. If you look on the operating expenditure side, we have our full-time staffing costs there that you can see, the expenses through 6 months. And then on the maintenance and operations side, I'm just going to point out a couple of the larger, dollar amounts there, the $113,000 for communication and information. That's basically some of the preliminary expenses that we incurred to start preparing for the Carolina Classic Fair. We didn't make the decision to cancel it until August. So obviously we a good number of months in the early part of the year, planning and getting ready for the fair. And so that number reflects incurring some of those expenses. You can see there under operating supplies, just some of the continuing work we did to rebrand, the fairgrounds with the new logo and the new paint scheme. And then if you go down to other general operating expenses, those are some fixed costs that we incur regardless of whether we have the fair or not. Mainly our indirect cost allocation that the fairgrounds does pay to cover its share of basically overall city overhead, like our human resources department, like our finance department, and our budget office, and the city manager's office, where these enterprise funds, pay us a share of that. So, so you can see there altogether total operating expenses of just almost $333,000. So after 6 months, we're showing an operating loss of $286,000, and that compares to a $1.2 million operating income this point last year. Look on further down in our non-operating revenues and expenditures, you can see some of the debt retirement that we are still paying for some capital expenditures we made a good number of years ago. So bottom line, at this point of the year, we're showing a net loss of $325,000. So that's kind of where we stand. We'll probably start to incur some expenses here in the latter half of the fiscal year as we start looking ahead and planning for the 2021 fair, but that's our current position for the fair. Any questions about that statement? Okay. I will share with you just one other note that the budget office in preparing our year-end projections, just when we made the decision not to cancel, when we made the decision to cancel the fair, that at the time we had projected that for the year we would realize a $2.5 million loss from canceling the fair. So that was for the overall fairgrounds. We'll talk about the overall fairgrounds here in a minute. So we'll see that number here in just a moment. So if there are no questions about the fair statement, we'll move on to the Winston-Salem Fairground Statement, which includes the fair numbers in it. So looking at here again, starting with the operating revenue side, almost $238,000 in revenue. You can see that there's, some of this includes the fair, the drive-through fair, but also, we were able to hold the drive-in movie theater. That was one of the allowable activities under the governor's executive orders. And so you can see there rentals and, facility use fees, admissions. So we have been able to generate some income that way. Also, we did, start the public ice skating season. And have realized some income through that, through opening up the ice rink. That's, again, another activity that we've been allowed to hold here during the pandemic. But obviously, it's a significant decrease from this point last year. On the operating expenditure side, and we have our staffing expenses, our personnel, and then a number of the expenses, again, related to starting to do some initial work, planning for the 2020 fair, before we canceled it, and then also, getting the ice rink installed and ready. So total operating expenditures of almost $995,000. And so an operating loss after 6 months of almost $757,000. You factor in some of our debt payments. And then you look at, we do transfer in a little bit of hotel motel tax dollars into the Fairgrounds Fund, and then an operating subsidy for Bowman Gray. So bottom line, after 6 months, we're looking at a net loss of $860,000. So as I just mentioned a second there, so at mid-year, we're looking at $860,000. We've projected an overall net loss for the fairgrounds of $2.5 million. And so we're being very careful about, managing our expenses. You will see when we present to you the third quarter and the year-end statements that we are renting the education building and the surrounding properties to the Forsyth County Health Department to operate a vaccination site, and we will realize some income from that, but mainly that's just a reimbursement of our expenses to support that site. So we'll see. That Robert will touch on this here in a little bit about the outlook for reopening the fairgrounds, but we do have some events on the books right now, and it's all really unknown whether we'll actually be able to hold the events. But at mid-year, we're looking at a loss of $860,000. Any questions about the fairground statement? Okay, moving on to the Benton statement. Grant and I are going to tag team this. In fact, I'll go ahead and let Grant start out and go over their report, and then I'll talk about the Benton budget from the city side. So, Grant.
Okay, good afternoon. So as you see here, revenues are down substantially over year. We came in for the first 6 months at $25,673. That's a difference of $2,594,000 from the year before, and $648,000 to our budget. When we wrote the budget, we pretty much were very conservative in the first 6 months of the year. In the second 6 months, we were already thought that we were going in January, February, March, we thought we would already be back to doing events, not like we were before, but we thought we would be coming back. So the first 6 months, we pretty much only had the Wake Forest football team. We had a funeral, Christmas in the city, and that's about it here in the center. So they came to the $25,000 there. When you get to the GOP line, we had budgeted for the first 6 months to lose $570,000. We came in at 507, which is a positive $62,000 to the GOP line. If you go all the way down to the bottom, after management fees and all the other income and expense there, you can see that we budgeted $675,000 in a loss. We came in at 608, so we're a positive $67,000 going into the next 6 months. The next 6 months are going to be much harder. We don't believe that we're going to see much really in revenue, even though there's just nothing that has changed. We're still, you can only do 100 people seated. We are going to have an event this weekend, but it's very slim with revenue coming forward. Any questions on the first 6 months for the convention center? Ben?
Okay. Yep. So, Rachel, if you'll scroll on to the city statement. So I have to say, I think that, in light of the challenges we're facing, that HVMG is doing an extraordinary job of managing our expenses at the Benton, and the fact that we're not seeing as a larger loss than we have, I think is a real testament to their management. So if you look at the city side there and looking at the total revenues and the operating expenditures, basically our operating loss on the city's books, we're showing $518,000. When you look at the non-operating expenses, there the management fee that we do pay HVMG to manage the building, you'll see there under miscellaneous, that's kind of a large number, $34,000. A lot of that is related to the legal expenses that the city has incurred as we've been working through the Grand Pavilion lease issue, and I'll be giving you an update on that here shortly. So we have enlisted our outside counsel that specializes in real estate issues to work with us on the Grand Pavilion lease. And then the liability, basically our property insurance and some what's called principal retirement, but that's basically debt we're paying on, that we're finishing up our payments on for the chairs and the tables that we bought after we renovated the Benton. So an overall loss of $699,000. That's split between two funds: our hotel motel fund, our occupancy tax fund. There, $120,000 there. That's basically just half of the budget. And then the remaining support comes from the general fund, from our tax dollars. So again, I think that HVMG is going to be managing the building very carefully in these remaining 6 months, because as Grant noted, we were assuming we'd be holding more events at this point than we are. We obviously have limited capacity, but our hope is that by year end that we won't see a significant increase in our subsidy. Any questions about the Benton statements? Okay. Then we'll conclude with Bowman Gray Stadium. As I mentioned, the theme continues on through all of our facilities. We did not have the remaining race dates last summer because the racing season was canceled. We didn't have a football season, so that's why you can see when you look at operating revenues that the income has dropped so significantly. We do continue to receive rent payments from the university for renting the south lot as a commuter student lot. And we also receive a payment from the university for their share of the operating expenses for the field house. Those are two sources of revenue that do cover our operating expenses for the field house and for the stadium. That's not really directly related to either of the events that are held there, racing and football. Look at the operating expenditure side there. A little bit of allocation of staff time for maintaining the stadium. And then you can see there we've got the rent and utilities. That's all mainly related to the field house. So that is partially covered by the contributions from the university. When you look at other contractual services, we've got a number of items in there. Some charges for some landscaping work, for just basically for facility maintenance that we incur to keep the stadium looking good. We've had to do some repair work in the field house, so those expenses are reflected between that line item and probably building and grounds maintenance. And then when you look at other general operating expenses, as you saw with the fairgrounds, there is an indirect cost allocation that is paid out of the Bowman Gray Stadium Fund to cover, like I said, that general city overhead, the central services that the city has, like HR and finance, that support all of the city's operations. So net income, operating income, after you take that into consideration, is $91,543, which is lower than where we were at this point last fiscal year. You factor in some debt payments that we're still paying on for some improvements that were done some years ago. So we're showing an overall an overall loss of almost $103,000 there. Then a subsidy, basically half of the budgeted subsidy from the fairgrounds. So we're showing a bottom line, an overall net loss of $66,483. So which is less than at this point last fiscal year. So again, just as I mentioned when we were talking about the WSSI lease agreement, we're planning, for racing to start April 17th. That's kind of where we're headed. Not sure if we'll be able to actually operate the stadium at full capacity. I mean, right now for a stadium that size, we'd be limited to 7%. of the stated capacity, which our stated capacity is a little over 13,000. So it wouldn't be a large number allowed for attendance, but we're just kind of waiting and seeing what's going to come about here in the next couple of months. Any questions about the Bowman Grace statement? Great, thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
So, okay.
No, I was going to say, we can go ahead on to the staff updates.
Okay, thank you. So we've got a number of updates here. As a lot of these you've seen on previous agendas, we just like to keep the commission informed just of the status. I'll touch on the first one here about the Bowman Grace Stadium Improvements Project, and then let Robert talk a little bit more about our preparations for racing season. So I don't have any photos to share with you all today, but work is progressing. If you were to go down to the stadium today, you would see that the east side restroom has 4 walls and a roof. They're actually doing a lot of the interior work now with the electrical wiring. They'll soon be installing the fixtures. So that restroom building is progressing, I think, very well, and that the plan is for it to be online by the time that the racing season starts. And then right next to it, you would see the new east side concession stand. It's got 4 walls and a roof, and the interior walls are in place. We're about to order the equipment, the kitchen equipment for the concession stand. And so that stand may not be online by the time racing season starts, but it would be soon, very soon after the season starts, that concession stand would come online. And because of that, that's why stand 2, excuse me, it's still in place so that they can operate out of that stand in the interim. They've got a lot of the foundation and masonry work starting to come up out of the ground for the west side concession stand and the west side restroom. So I think we feel really good about their progress, even though last week and perhaps even this week might not be very friendly to us weather-wise. I think that the contractor feels like that we're still on schedule. If you look down on the field, looks like a bomb's been dropped on the football field. They've done a lot of the drainage work around the track and in the outside of the football field, and that's basically in place. So at some point here in the next few weeks, they'll be looking to start to work on regrading the football field, and that's going to be significant because if you were to go down there right now, they've excavated down to a level where, according to what the contractor told us, that's probably the depth they're going to go to peel off top field to get it regraded, and it's quite a depth. So anyway, so we're very pleased from a city's perspective about the progress, and hopefully maybe when the weather dries out and we might be able to invite you all to come down and do a walkthrough. So with that, I'll turn it over to Robert to talk about preparations for the 2021 racing season.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks, Chair Jingles. I just kind of piggybacking what Ben said on the improvement projects. A lot of what's going on with the stadium improvement is a big part of how we are going to prepare for Bowman Gray race season, that opening weekend in April. So with that, we've been meeting. We've begun meetings bi-weekly right now with concessions, the concessions groups that will work out there. The plan as of now to open would have we'd still be utilizing our temporary or our current concession stands. There will be no new concession stands built by the time the first race opens. There'd be probably a lag of about a month, and then permitting with the health department. So we're working with concessions and racing on figuring out how to optimize the concession activity, and that all will be based upon, what an attendance looks like. So typically we would have 3 concession stands for 10,000 folks. So kind of scaling that down based on what attendance might look like should racing begin. So after meeting with concessions, we're meeting bi-weekly, if not weekly, with the racing folks. So trying to understand what the expectation is there. And really, we have a checklist that we've historically gone off of. So we're bringing that checklist into what today looks like with the construction going on. And we'll be working with the construction group on combining a checklist for them just to make sure that come April 22nd, that we'll have everything checked off, the operation in good running order. So I think as far as preparations for racing season, we're in good shape. We update racing every 2 weeks right now, and then every week on a phone call. So we are, I'd say we're in good shape and on schedule to race if we need to. Is there any questions on that piece? All right, I'll just jump right down to the next one, which would be the status of the fairgrounds. Just like we spoke last month, we are still a COVID testing location, and that is going to be extended another month into March. So that'll be 2 days a week in the cattle barn. The county is also using the education building as a vaccine operation, roughly vaccinating 1,000 people a day, give or take, depending on the day and how many vaccines they have available. And that is 6 days a week typically. There's talks about growing that operation into the midway and into the inner grounds. And that's an ongoing conversation that we're having. As Ben mentioned, we are able to host ice skating. So we have been hosting public ice skating, youth hockey, and some private adult groups. That's going to be ongoing until March 21st when we take the ice out. So just a couple key events that we have, at least in the ice skating rink. We'll be hosting the Kaha Youth Hockey Association tournament, which is Carolina amateur hockey, and that will be all of North Carolina. There's 16 total teams who are coming to the Fairgrounds Annex to host a tournament. There will be no guests other than parents of minor players. That will be the only folks allowed in the building, and we'll be limiting that to the 25 at any one session per the state mandates. We'll also be hosting the last weekend in March, the ACC SEC hockey tournament, which we typically host the ACC tournament. Since all the schools aren't playing, they've recruited some SEC schools, and it will be really just a private tournament with no public offerings at this time, but it will be streamed live on YouTube through the Thunderbirds broadcast channel. And I think that's about it on that. I mean, I'll speak to what Grant mentioned. We can host some events in the similar fashion that Grant is, with hundreds, up to 100 seated guests, more of the private convention style, smaller meeting type opportunities, which we don't have much of. So as of now, there's not really anything scheduled out into March. So we'll just keep rolling with the governor's orders and see what comes of that. Are there any questions on fairgrounds events or reopening? All right, I'll jump to the Thunderbird season. For those who hadn't seen, the Thunderbirds and the FPHL, the league they are a part of, has agreed to commence play at the end of February. There is going to be a total of 4 teams participating in the season. And the Thunderbirds will play only road games since they can have no fans here. Their ownership group has committed to playing this season, but just on the road in Columbus and in New York. So I believe there's 2 full road teams and 2 home teams that will be a part of that season. So while we won't have Thunderbird hockey here, it will be available to the fans via the Thunderbirds TV network and radio and all that. So we're happy for them that they can do that. And hopefully next year we can have a full regular season with full fans come October, November of 2021. Questions, Thunderbirds? All right, I'll kick to Cheryl, and she can give a quick update on the Carolina Classic Fair.
Thank you, Robert. Right now, we are still planning for the fair as a full event, hoping that it will stay that way. Just a couple, I'm gonna go over a few things in our planning process, where we're at in that. We just recently kicked off a meeting with Vela, discussing our plans for the advertising, website, creative, app development on our theme, Second to None in 2021. Entertainment, I've talked with most of our entertainers and gotten confirmation on their schedules and returning. Since everything was approved last year, we're just kind of moving all of our acts into 2021, working with the city attorney office and with wording on addendums for contracts and things like that. That's progressing quite well. Our entries portion of the fair, right now we are contacting our individual departments and superintendents to get any changes, additions, and we're updating our entry process. Our vendor and concessionaire portion, those contracts will go out in April, as in previous years. And with the carnival, Straits actually just opened their first fair of the season last Friday down in Osceola County Fair in Florida. I've got a call into them and looking forward to hearing from them how that went and see what kind of operational changes they had put in place in order to run. Of course, we are monitoring our state and national associations. We're attending seminars and Zoom meetings, just getting ideas and trying to stay as up to date as possible, and so that we can implement any good ideas these other fairs will have. Of course, as everything slowly starts to open, as we get more information, I'll be happy to update you on the process and make sure we're all informed. Has anybody got any questions? Okay.
I think we're back to the Benton. So with the Benton, as we've talked about, Robert, Ben and I meet after every governor's announcement just to make sure that we're doing the same things in both facilities, to make sure that we're ready for the guests and make sure that everyone stays safe. So one other note for you to know that the City Council did award a contract for lighting in the Salem Ballroom. As you might remember, we did not replace the lighting or the dimming system in there when we were in renovation in 2017, and this has been a capital project for a couple of years. We finally have found a time, so the City Council did award a bid to Brad's Electrical. All the product has been ordered. We're hoping to get started with that in the next 3 weeks or so to get that project done before we open back up.
Thank you, Grant. So I'm going to take the next two and very quickly. Last month, I briefed the commission on the Grand Pavilion Conference Center lease and the project that we're planning for to refresh that space. Just wanted to share with you all that the City Council's Finance Committee did consider an item last week to amend our lease agreement with basically the owner of the Embassy Suites Hotel, the entity that actually it was called PM Meeting NUC, to amend that lease to put in place a payment schedule for them to repay the city the $800,000 that they are delinquent on, which goes all the way back to September of 2019. That amount is kind of split between what we call pre-pandemic payments and pandemic payments. The pre-pandemic payments they're going to start paying back starting in July of this year and do that all the way through 2023. And then the remaining amount, which we're calling the pandemic payments, the payments that are due to us from March to December, they would pay in December of 2030, either by the time that, even whether they sell the hotel or they just have to make that kind of final payment. That's when they would make what we call those pandemic payments. As part of that amendment, the city has immediate access to the space to do the planning and design work for a refresh project. We will also assume control of the space. In other words, we will be, using HVMG, who manages the Benton, to take over management of the Grand Pavilion and Conference Center space. Any revenues generated from those events would be city revenues. We'd also have to rely on those revenues to cover our expenses for putting on those events. And then hopefully any net revenue that we realize, that would go towards paying, making the debt payments on the space that we have incurred going back to 2004 when we acquired the space and renovated it as part of the overall Twin City Quarter project. So I think the two big keys about this item that's going to council is, number one, we have a schedule in place to be repaid, and then two, that we're taking control of the space, because we want to make sure that we're not competing with ourselves, that our pavilion space isn't competing with the Benton, and so having it under one management, HVMG, I think we feel like is the best path going forward. Any questions about that? Okay, and then finally, as far as my items, wanted to just give you an update on the lease agreement with Truist Stadium. You've probably read in the journal about the discussions that the city has had with the Winston-Salem Dash ownership about a new lease agreement. That was recommended for approval last month, and then as required by state law, the council held a public hearing at the beginning of this month at their first meeting. And then after that, they did approve a new lease agreement with the Winston-Salem Dash that would essentially cut the lease payments in half. It would also eliminate the ticket surcharge requirement that was part of an incentives agreement that we had with the Dash. But the whole purpose of this new agreement is to better position the Dash to be one of the remaining minor league baseball teams. As you've probably seen in the paper as well, Major League Baseball went through contraction, reduced the number of teams from 160 to I think about 118. Thankfully, the Dash is one of the remaining teams, and I think saw recently that they've already been. We know what league they're going to play in, a high single A league, and they're going to be playing a lot with the Greensboro Grasshoppers. So I think we're excited about the idea of having maybe a local rivalry start back up. But that has now been approved, and now it's in the hands of the attorneys to work through the new lease agreement. Any questions about that? Okay, Robert, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, I'll close this part with the Lease Rink at Bailey Park update. The Fairgrounds team, mainly the Annex staff, has been approached about managing a temporary ice rink at Bailey Park and Innovation Quarter, which would be a long-term agreement or operation. They're thinking of purchasing what is called a glice rink, which is fake ice, for lack of a better term, that pretty much gets pressure washed and mopped and then can be skated on again. It does not need to be Zambonied. It will hold 32 people at any given time. So it's a similar size and operation to what Greensboro does downtown for their Winterfest. I believe the folks at Bailey Park Innovation Quarter are trying to accomplish kind of that same feel between the months of November and February. And they've looked to us to kind of put together a proposal to manage that operation with the rink that they purchased. So I think in the coming months, as we work through some details, we'll be presenting you all with a management agreement and of operation with them if agreed upon. So I think that's it in a nutshell. If there's any questions, let me know.
Commissioners, are there any further questions for the city staff? Hearing none, then it looks like our next meeting is going to be March 15th. So of course, Rachel will give us our monthly reminders about that. And if there be nothing else, thank you everyone for your service, and we are adjourned.
Thank you.